plains that cultists believe to be the most holy place on earth. Here, at the Yearning for Zion Ranch, the cult has been able to carry out its abuse of children away from the eyes of the law. Warren Jeffs is the latest example of a cult leader. A man driven by power, paranoia, and greed. But as the manhunt for Jeffs continued, unknown numbers of girls became unwilling brides. Each day Jeffs remained free, a girl paid a horrifying price. August 28th, 2006. Las Vegas police pull over a red SUV on a routine traffic violation. But the man at the wheel is no routine criminal. It is Warren Jeffs, one of America's 10 most wanted fugitives.
The leader of the FLDS, Warren Jeffs, is currently under indictment for both enabling the marriage of an underage young girl to an already married 28-year-old and for acts of sexual nature with underage children himself.
Like most cult leaders, Warren Jeffs has been using religion to act out his fantasies of domination and greed. Dependent on secrecy, he built a temple to his perversity in the isolated plains of Texas. But now, the prophet has a problem. Locked up in a federal prison and far from his obedient flock, Jeffs is finally to be punished for his crimes. And when cult leaders are cornered, they can drive the cult to self-destruct. Guyana, 1977. 30 years before Warren Jeffs' capture, another cult leader found himself the object of investigation. Rather than be caught and punished for his crimes, Jim Jones led his followers on a journey of paranoia and madness. Authorities didn't foresee that it would end in a massacre. Hundreds of corpses heaped upon one another, in testament to the terrifying power of a cult. Lynn, Indiana, 1941. 10-year-old pastor Jim Jones is preparing for one of his first church services. Neglected by his parents and often alone, Jim seeks comfort in the stories of the Bible.
The cult leaders have early experiences of neglect, of abandonment, of disappointment in parental figures and authorities.
A poor and lonely child, Jim's interest in the Bible leads him to a Pentecostal church on the outskirts of town. Believing in salvation through the Holy Spirit, Pentecostalists demonstrate their faith by speaking in tongues and witnessing faith healings, often ostracized for their own extreme behavior. The Pentecostalists offered Jim acceptance.
I joined a Pentecostal church because they were the most despised. They were the rejects of the community. I found immediate acceptance, and I must say, in all honesty, as much love as I could interpret love.
Religion offered Jim Jones the hope and acceptance he needed, but it was power that he craved. He quickly learned to twist religion for his own selfish needs, luring children to his house for Bible study, and then locking them in. As a teenager, Jim was an exemplary student. Cultivating his own speaking talent, he pored over the speeches of progressive socialist leaders, Marx, Lenin, Mao. Raised in poverty, Jones was convinced that a church should provide for its congregants. By the time he started his own church, the young preacher had formed a vision of socially minded ministry that he termed apostolic socialism.
Jim Jones's cult early on in Indiana was very helpful to the local community. They provided soup kitchens for the elderly and for poverty-stricken people.
Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, minister to the sick and the needy. I mean, that was the core of what the temple was about. Ostensibly, that's what the core of what the temple was about. That's what I believe the temple was about.
By the age of 35, Jim Jones is a success. The church he started as a young preacher, newly named People's Temple, is attracting scores of new members. He's found a wife who shares his commitment to racial equality, and together they have adopted a veritable rainbow family. But Jim's radical politics and liberal attitude are too much for conservative Indiana.
Early on, he was a guy with some very strong ideals in an unaccepting culture. He had the notion of racial immigration in a tough town like Indianapolis that didn't support that idea.
Despite the growth of his congregation, Jones feels persecuted and misunderstood. His childish need for attention has matured into a full-blown hunger for power, and he must move his church to a place where it can mature. A place that welcomes progressive ideas, social activism, and radical politics. He moves the People's Temple to Northern California.
It's no secret San Francisco has been kind of a mix, a place where lots of ideas came together. Anti-war days, Haight-Ashbury. The town was very open and tolerant to a lot of groups, a lot of ideas.
The Bay Area would provide the perfect social climate for the People's Temple. From progressive communities in and around San Francisco, Jim Jones would recruit a small army of hard-working people devoted to social action.
The progressive community in San Francisco and the liberal community loved us because we were clean-cut and responsible, and we had money, and we helped people.
Rest homes for the elderly, tutoring classes for students, free legal advice. People's Temple provided a variety of social services, but for Jim, the social programs served a more selfish need.
Most of these destructive cult leaders fit at least 8 of the 9 criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. Jim Jones, in all of his social programs and his congregation's involvement in the community, increasingly built his own sense of power and significance and glory in these projects.
The progressive atmosphere of San Francisco afforded a lot of opportunity for an activist church like Jones's. But the quest for power and glory was only part of his motivation. The driving force in the move to California was his exceedingly strong paranoia. In 1962, Esquire magazine published an article on the 9 safest places to hide in the event of a nuclear attack. Redwood Valley, just outside San Francisco, was one of them.
They thought it would be safe from a lot of perils. They even thought a nuclear war might break out, and Redwood Valley, for some reason, was thought to be safer than any other place.
Jones had had a vision that the Midwest was to be destroyed in a nuclear attack, and it was therefore essential to move quickly. He even set specific dates for this nuclear explosion that would begin the end of the world.
I have given the date, the month, and the year where a nuclear war will take place. I want to be like Jonah of old. I want to be proven wrong. I'll be happy if one of my prophecies fail. They haven't yet, but I'll be glad when one of them does.
The move from Indiana was only Jones's first step in a dark descent, one that would drive his doomed temple much further than San Francisco. San Francisco, 1969. The good deeds of the People's Temple masked the narcissism and paranoia of its leader, Jim Jones. But as the temple continues to build its reputation in San Francisco, cracks are starting to appear.